Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would review this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by the boxing channel that I tend to review here and there, Boxing Ego. And the reason why I thought that I would review this video is because I thought that this specific subject and topic was very particularly interesting. And this is going to be overall the reviewing a statement or what Andre SOG Ward, of course, the former, two-time division world champion, the very, very great fighter Andre SOG Ward, and what he recently had to say about Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. And I also wanted to review what Mr. Boxing Ego had to say on it because I've already kind of reviewed his thoughts and opinions on what he has thought about the Golovkin take. But in my view, whenever it comes to a Canelo Alvarez conversation, you cannot really rely on what Boxing Ego is going to state because it's very clear that he has a personal disliking for him. Now, some people may say, oh, well, is it, because he states that he wants to see the Benavidez and Charlo fights? Is that the reason? No, not at all. And I would agree that I would love to see those fights as well. And I believe that eventually those fights will happen, at least those two fights eventually. But Boxing Ego, you can very clearly tell whenever he is talking about Canelo Alvarez, it is always something negative. There's always some disappointment apparently from him that goes on. He never apparently performs at the par, according to Boxing Ego, even when I believe that he looks particularly dominant and a certain amount of other people do. It's just very, very clear that Boxing Ego, that he is not a Canelo Alvarez fan. And hey, it is what it is. In my view, it's not a good thing to be a fanboy in the first place. But it's very clear that he does not like Canelo Alvarez for whatever reason. I think I have a couple hypotheticals for that, but we'll leave that for later. But anyways, Mr. Andre SOG Ward said recently something about Mr. Canelo Alvarez, stating that he believes that Canelo should have performed better in the Gennady Golovkin trilogy. And he believes that, Canelo Alvarez, that he should have actually stopped Gennady Triple G Golovkin in that fight. And he is not the only one with that opinion. Boxing Ego also shares that opinion. And there's a certain amount of other fighters, even Roberto Duran, maybe even Chavez, from what I've heard through the grapevine, that possibly all in all believe that Canelo Alvarez could have performed better and stopped him. What I'm going to say about Canelo Alvarez is this. Canelo is going to get a lot of criticism no matter what type of performances he puts on, in my view, until he defeats Dimitri Bivol in that rematch. Even in my view, if he were to defeat Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez, which are two great fights, where Canelo Alvarez, in my view, or what he's going to have to do if he is going to return to the number one pound-per-pound spot, he's going to have to defeat Dimitri Bivol in that rematch. That's assuming that Dimitri Bivol is even the victor overall in that Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez fight, because that is not an easy fight for either gentleman. Certainly not. But all in all, I wanted to talk about this because I do have to wonder with Mr. Andre SOG Ward, and oftentimes I think that he's a very logical and objective commentator, but I do have to wonder all in all if he does have something personal against Canelo Alvarez. And that's not me necessarily stating that Andre Ward is hating on Canelo Alvarez, at least all the time. But every single time that I hear Canelo Alvarez come out of his mouth, Andre Ward almost always has something critical to say and something on the null to where, kind of like Boxing Ego, he always seems disappointed or all in all, apparently Canelo Alvarez, he can't do, any right. And I'm not a person on the null that is a fanboy of any of these fighters. I just don't take a look at criticism that I find logical. And all in all, I just use it overall to fanboy out. That's not the type of person I am. But I do have to wonder every single time when you talk about a certain individual, when it comes down to it, and it never seems to be positive, even when there are certain positive results, I do have to wonder what is your personal take with that fighter, or what overall is the personal beef with that fighter if you have a beef with that fighter. Now, maybe Andre Ward just believes that Canelo is not as good as what some people say. Or it could be that maybe Andre Ward does not want Canelo Alvarez to surpass him. It maybe also could be that maybe he's sticking up for his boy Terrence Bud Crawford to try and be the number one pound-per-pound fighter. He tried to do the same thing when Vasily Lomachenko was ranked the number one pound-per-pound fighter. I'm not really exactly sure why Andre Ward sometimes says the things that he does about Mr. Canelo Alvarez, and I usually find him to be a very decent commentator. But I do have to wonder, all in all, when you have nothing nice to say about a particular person, I do have to wonder all of a sudden, are your emotions slightly attached overall to certain arguments that you're going to make about that person? But anyways, we're going to see all in all what Mr. Andre SOG Ward and what Mr. Boxing Ego had to say. They're going to be talking about the trilogy. Let's continue.
Andre Ward reacts to Canelo versus Triple G and admits that Triple G had been looking old and shop worn for a while. Let's talk about it. What up, Fight World? It's your boy.
Well, you know what? I have been stating this now for the past few years. This is nothing new. And any of us on the know that actually knew what the hell we were talking about. We knew that Gennady Golovkin was not the same fighter that he once was. It's very clear that he was not the same fighter as what he once was. But what amazes me is that you had certain boxing channels like Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV that were trying to legitimately tell you that the reason why Gennady Golovkin didn't look as good against Sergey Derevyanchenko and some of these other boxers is because he was just always overrated in the first place. Now, if you want to maybe go on a narrative to say that, maybe Gennady Golovkin got a little bit protected by the media, maybe all in all that would be okay. But to state that when a fighter clearly was never the same fighter after the rematch with Canelo Alvarez and had a different trainer and was the ages from 38, I believe, to 40 years old. And then now all of a sudden that Canelo Alvarez fights him, and now all of a sudden that's when Gennady Triple G Golovkin was old. I guarantee you that had this been Jamal Charlo, or had this been Demetrius Bubo Andrade, or David Benavidez, who right now they're riding the coattails on because they want to try and humiliate Canelo Alvarez and badmouth him. Do you believe that, all in all, even if you watch these channels, that they would have stated that, Gennady Golovkin clearly was not the same fighter? Of course they wouldn't have. Okay? Of course they wouldn't have. So it just is what it is. And that's why a lot of these times, when I talk about these channels, they're not reliable. They're not reliable whatsoever because they're fanboys at the end of the day. And they're pro-racial. It is what it is. And a lot of boxing fans are pro-racial, but then don't tell me that you're a logical and objective commentator. Okay? When you put your emotions and your feelings into an argument that is supposed to be about statistics and facts and accomplishments and all that sort of stuff, do not tell me, all in all, that you belong in the argument. Because all in all, you're not going to create a logical and objective argument. It's just not going to happen. But anyway.
Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Make sure you come in and smash the like button. SLC. Subscribe, like, and comment for the latest and greatest in boxing. I need your guys' help. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. Max Kellerman had Andre Ward as a special guest, and he recapped and gave his opinions and thoughts on the Canelo versus Triple G Part 3 farce, or as they like to call it.
And notice that Mr. Boxing Ego called it a farce. Now, I wonder, all in all, if Deontay Wilder were to have a trilogy with Luis Ortiz, or, all in all, if it was a fighter that he tended to like, would he, would he call it a farce? Now, don't get me wrong, the trilogy was not as good, all in all, as what the other two were. But once again, if you had half of a boxing mind, or, if you knew, all in all, what overall point both fighters were in their career, that's what you expected. So once again, the people, all in all, or at least the people that do not like Canelo, they're criticizing, all in all, his performance, and they're stating, oh, well, he should have done this, or the trilogy was terrible. Well, what else did you really want Canelo Alvarez to do? At the end of the day, it was a complete shutout, and Canelo was coming off of a very, very dominant loss. So in my view, at least, he did pretty much everything that he needed to do. Kind of like if I take a look at Deontay Wilder, who I believe is fighting next week, and I will be getting that fight because I am very particularly interested to see where he is at this point in time in his career. If he does not look the greatest against Robert Elenius, you can't all in all, basically say that, oh, well, he just looked like complete shit. He should have done, way better, because Deontay Wilder is at a different point in his career than what an undefeated fighter would be, or what a fighter would be who is completely comfortable right now in the weight class that they're in, and maybe does not have a little bit of questions about what part in the career that they're in. So Canelo Alvarez, once again, for the performance that he had against a fighter that gave him two very, very challenging fights, in the previous two fights. And on top of that, he was fighting Dimitri Bivol in that prior fight, and he lost very dominantly, in my opinion. I didn't think that the performance was bad at all. I mean, people are acting like all in all that, this was like Adrian Broner against Jesse Vargas or something. I mean, like, Canelo still won the fight by complete shutout. But anyway.
Trilogy. This is what Andre Ward had to say. Quote, Golovkin, he's looked 40 years old for some time. right? Right? And then Max Kellerman said he has, right around the time he turned 38 through 40. He looked like he could fight.
Well, I agree with you there, Andre Ward, and I've been saying that for the past few years. That Gennady Golovkin is not the same fighter, and that he pretty much was just waiting on that ticket overall for Mr. Canelo Alvarez. It was very clear that he was not interested in facing a certain amount of the other fighters, even a Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Bubu Andrade, and that he only wanted to fight Canelo Alvarez. Now, I could maybe see him wanting to face Jamal Charlo, maybe overall for a last fight just to see if he could accomplish something well at the end point of his career. But I'm not really even sure if I see that fight happening. We'll see what happens. And Jamal Charlo, even though he was interested in that fight a while ago, I don't know if Jamal Charlo was going to see much use for that fight anymore. But we'll see.
He could still fight at the highest level. When he fought Canelo the second time, I thought Canelo won the second fight. Back to Andre Ward's comment, he says, quote, I thought that Canelo should have stopped that version of Gennady Golovkin. If Canelo is who he says he is, an all-time great, you got to take advantage of a fighter like that.
A comment like that makes me wonder if Andre Ward did truly say that, and I'll take Mr. Ego's word for it when it comes down to it. That makes me wonder what personal investment does Andre Ward have in Canelo Alvarez? And you can have a personal investment in a fighter or in an athlete or in a person, whether you love them as a fan or whether you hate them as a fan, when it comes down to it. Because you're a fan of hating them, you put basically just as much energy, if not even more, into hating that person as a person who loves them or adores them. Now, I'm not going to necessarily 100% state that Andre Ward is hating on Canelo, but I do find that particular statement interesting because, once again, in my view, if you're a logical and objective commentator, I don't think that there's any doubt in my mind about Canelo Alvarez being an all-time great fighter. If another fighter, all in all, of that degree, if Terrence Bud Crawford had the names on his resume of a Canelo Alvarez, people would be calling him one of the 20 greatest fighters of all time. No doubt about it. When it comes down to at least these same channels that love to criticize Canelo Alvarez. Could you imagine having Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith and Araceli Lara and Gennady Golovkin and Danny Jacobs and Austin Trout and Miguel Cotto all on your resume, and apparently you're not an all-time great fighter? That doesn't make any sense. Now, certain people can say that, well, he didn't face Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Bubu Andrade. Well, you can try to bring those guys up if you want to, and I would love to see those fights just as much as the next guy. But at the end of the day, Canelo has already beaten guys that were greater than what those fighters ever were. And people can get mad at that all they want to. I don't give a shit who gets upset at that. A prime Gennady Golovkin is levels, not even just a level, levels above Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Bubu Andrade, at least by a couple levels. And people cannot like that, all they want to. Take a look at Demetrius Andrade. Take a look at the biggest win in his career against Vanes Martirosyan. And then take a look at what Gennady Golovkin did right before the Canelo Alvarez rematch to Vanes Martirosyan. The fight didn't even last 2 rounds. So you tell me who the better fighter was. Now, of course, sometimes that can be looked at as fight math, and we can't always take a look at it. But listen, if you know anything about boxing, you know that Gennady Golovkin was always a bigger threat to Canelo Alvarez than either Charlo brother or Demetrius Bubu Andrade. And a lot of people are not going to agree with that. That's okay. It just is what it is. I've seen Jamal Charlo against Matt Korobov. I've seen him against Juan Macias Montiel. I've seen him against Austin Trout. I have never seen him as a viable option to actually beat Canelo Alvarez. That does not mean that I don't want to see the fight. But I think people that actually believe that Jamal Charlo can beat Canelo, at least at his best, in my view, they're kidding themselves. A lot of people would disagree, or certain people may disagree, but that's just the way that I look at it. I just think Jamal Charlo's way too flawed, and the same thing for Demetrius Bubu Andrade. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong. Those fights are going to need to happen eventually if Canelo wants to continue his greatness, because those are still very decent contenders on the resume. But, I mean, to me, like, not fighting Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Bubu Andrade while he's fought Araceli Lara and Gennady Golovkin and even a Caleb Plant. Now, Caleb Plant, in my opinion, is probably on the same level as what a Jamal Charlo, probably a little bit better than Jamal Charlo, to be honest. but probably about on the same level as a Demetrius Bivol Andrade. Maybe you can argue that there's certain things that Demetrius Bivol Andrade does better. But with Canelo fighting names like that, in my view, that's like bitching about Errol Spence Jr. Well, how come you won't fight Danny Garcia, even though you fought Keith Thurman and Sean Porter? Like, to me, that just doesn't make any sense. Now, you can try to say all in all that, those guys are undefeated if you want to, which is great, but I'm sorry, but in my opinion, Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo, they've never really been as great as what a certain amount of these channels have tried to hype them up to be. Now, at the end of the day, that is me speaking my opinion, and that is an opinion. To prove that 100%, we are going to need to see Canelo Alvarez in the ring with at least some of those guys. We are going to have to see eventually the Jamal Charlo fight. Whether Canelo wins or loses this next match against Dimitri Bivol, I assume that Dimitri Bivol will win the match, but we are going to have to see those fights eventually. But I just thought that comment from Andre Ward was very particularly interesting, and what that tells me is that either A, he thinks Canelo's a bit overrated, or B, he thinks that the media is trying to push Canelo Alvarez over him in terms of the all-time great conversation, and he ain't having it, which it is what it is. In my view, in terms of greatness, they're both on that similar level, both Andre Ward and Canelo Alvarez. And some people may say, what are you talking about? Andre Ward is levels above Canelo Alvarez. No, he's really not. In fact, they're exactly on the same level. Because when you talk about Andre S.O.G. Ward, he is an all-time great fighter in my view. No doubt about it. But he's in that same conversation with Joe Calzaghe, Tommy Hearns, Bernard Hopkins, and Canelo Alvarez. That's where he is. And maybe if you wanted to sneak other names in there, probably a Sugar Shane Mosley, Miguel Cotto, blah, 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 blah. Now, Andre Ward at one point in time was looked at as the number one pound-for-pound fighter after he ended up defeating a Sergey Kovalev. But when we take a look at the names in his career, I'm not really sure, all in all, if I would say that he has the amount of names on his resume quite like a Canelo Alvarez. Now, if you wanted to debate it, maybe. But the best wins of his career, I believe, are against Mikhail Kessler, who I'm not really sure if I would ever debate was on the same level as even an Arasani Lara or a, what the hell was his name, Gennady Golovkin. I certainly would not put him on the same level as a Gennady Golovkin. It's really even a debate, in my view, if he was on the same level as an Arasani Lara, or at least debatably, when it comes down to it. Now, when you talk about Carl Froch was a very decent fighter, first ballot Hall of Famer, but I'm not really sure if you would call him an all-time great fighter. Carl Froch was a very decently flawed fighter, and I think that Andre Ward was the perfect type of style to beat him. And then you also have Arthur Abraham, who was a very decent fighter, but never really a great fighter. And Chad Dawson, he may have been the first one to defeat Chad Dawson. I can't really remember. That was a great win. And then, of course, the biggest one of his career, he beat Sergey the Crusher Kovalev. But when you talk about Canelo, he also has wins over Gennady Golovkin. Gennady had just as much a high esteem as what a Sergey Kovalev did. Now, some people may say, well, Andre Ward was able to beat Sergey Kovalev both times by decision. Canelo ended up getting a draw. And in my opinion, Canelo should have lost that first fight. But there's also many people that would debate that Andre Ward lost that first fight against Sergey Kovalev. Would I personally say that? I can't say for sure because it's been such a long time since I watched it. But at the end of the day, when you talk about the names and when you talk about accomplishments, no, they are very similar. Andre Ward, of course, ended up being undefeated, but I wouldn't say that he's fought as many consistent challengers as what a Canelo Alvarez has. And some people may get uptight about that. Listen, it just is what it is. You're talking about a fighter that has defeated Callum Smith and Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, as well as Arasani Lara, Miguel Cotto, Austin Trout when they were all A-grade fighters. You're also talking about Gennady Triple G Golovkin. So they're both very, very similar in terms of the greatness scale. I think Andre Ward, and another fighter that I would put on that same level as those two is Tyson Fury, even though some people would disagree. But Tyson Fury, in my view, he's on their same level. All right, and in my view, in terms of greatness, you maybe could debate that Canelo is slightly above them, even though some people would disagree. Now, if you were going to ask me straight up, who do I believe would win overall in a 1v1 boxing match between Andre Ward and Canelo, I probably would have went with Andre Ward just because of the size and because of his type of style, but it would have been very particularly interesting. But we also must realize that Andre Ward is a natural 168 to 175 pounder. Canelo Alvarez overall is a natural 160 pounder. And a lot of the times in these fights, even against Danny Jacobs or Caleb Plant or against Gennady Golovkin, he usually is outsized by these guys. So the fact that Canelo has been able to become a 4-weight division champion is a very special accomplishment. But anyway.
Literally just showed up to get a check. Wow. He said Golovkin really just showed up to get a check. The performance from Canelo was a little shocking. I thought he would do a little bit more, but the performance from Golovkin was not shocking. I was shocked by the reaction and the response that people finally got the revelation that he's looking old. He's looked old for the last 2 or 3 years, and because he's...
Well, I certainly do agree with that, Andre Ward. I think that Gennady Golovkin has been looking old now for the past few years, ever since the Canelo Alvarez rematch, or what I should say is ever since after that Canelo Alvarez rematch, Gennady Golovkin has not looked the same fighter, either physically nor mentally. So I agree with you on that one.
The mantra of Mexican style, everybody excuses the fact that he takes way too many punches and way too much punishment.
I agree with that, Andre, and I said the same thing in my fight review about the Canelo versus Gennady Golovkin fight. Gennady is a fighter that if he was going to beat Canelo, he was going to have to come forward. He was not going to be able to beat him on the back foot, at least, not mainly. Even Gennady Golovkin in his prime is not usually going to be able to beat Canelo on the back foot. He's going to have to try to beat him. Now, that's not me saying that he can't move in and out, but he can't mainly be on the back foot, because that would give the hand speed advantage and that would give the pressure advantage to Canelo. And in order to try and stop that momentum, Gennady Golovkin was going to have to come forward behind his jab, and he all in all was going to have to show that that power is still there and his decent defense, and all in all that you're not going to intimidate me. That's how Gennady Golovkin would have to beat a fighter, an all-around fighter like a Canelo Alvarez. And I think that Gennady is somewhat of an all-around fighter as well, but he's not on the same level as a Canelo. So when Gennady Golovkin was in this fight, the fight pretty much went down exactly as I predicted. Gennady, in my view, was not going to be able to do much in this fight. He clearly wasn't the same fighter. And not only that, you're dealing with a Canelo that is very intelligent at this point in time in his career. And all in all, is pretty much, very, very, very overall, what's the word that I'm looking for? I guess pretty much at the peak of his career.
The response time and reaction wasn't there. This is Andre Ward breaking down the fight. If you think about it, this is the biggest name, the only real name that Golovkin has on his record. No matter how you feel about it, that's the truth. Andre Ward continues, I don't think that he wanted to fight some of those fighters, talking about Triple G. I'm not talking about me. There were certain guys that you and I know being at HBO that he wasn't going to fight. Max Kellerman asked Andre Ward where Canelo's legacy is at, and Ward says, quote, it's tricky, it's complicated. On the surface, he's fought everybody, he's done everything, he's taken all the risks. If you know what you're looking at, and when you know what you're looking for, you look at some of the names he fought, Canelo doesn't have a lot of prime names on his resume.
And what that tells me right there is that Andre Ward, that he has a personal issue with Canelo. Because I really don't know how you can take a look at Canelo Alvarez's resume. And Andre Ward is not a stupid dude. Andre Ward is not one of these new media, types. He's not a guy on the know that usually takes a look at things from an illogical perspective. Now, some may say, well, what are you talking about? That might be his logical perspective. I don't personally agree. And the reason why is because you can try to make that point if you want to about how Canelo Alvarez, he beat a 33-year-old Miguel Cotto, even though many people tried to say that he was 35 and he wasn't, and that he beat a 37-year-old Gennady Golovkin or a 36. You can try to make that, point all you want to. But at the end of the day, if you're a professional boxer, at least usually, not even a professional boxer, if you're someone that has a logical and sound mind, you know when someone is at the peak of their career. And Gennady Golovkin, when he was 36 years old, was looked at as one of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters in the world. All right? So it just is what it is. That's just sometimes how things are. And then if you go on to Austin Trout, he was in his prime. If you go on to Araceli Lara, he was in his prime. If you go to Danny Jacobs, he was in his prime. If you go to Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, he was in his prime. If you go to Caleb Plant, he was in his prime. Now, if you want to allege about Sergey Kovalev that he wasn't in his prime, I think all in all that would be, a decent statement. That would not be, a bad statement because that would be somewhat true. But when you're talking about a lot of these other fighters, no, sir, Andre Ward, I can't necessarily agree with that. I would have to know who you're talking about specifically. Now, maybe you're just mainly talking about Sergey Kovalev. This could be, once again, because Andre Ward does not want Canelo Alvarez to be over him, or he does not believe that Canelo was over him, kind of like Kobe Bryant when he talks about LeBron James. And sometimes Kobe Bryant will throw certain hints out there to where he says, "No, LeBron, you're not over me," as an all-time great player. I believe that there is a similar energy here. Because I'm sorry, Mr. Andre, I would have to know which fighters that you're specifically talking about. Because if you want to make the point, with Sergey Kovalev, that's a decent point. Maybe Miguel Cotto if you wanted to, but Miguel Cotto was in a revival at that point in time in his career, and he was looked at as a very, very, very decent fighter who had been revived by Freddie Roach and who had become one of the middleweight champions. And whoever the winner of that Canelo versus Miguel Cotto fight, which at the time was looked at as a 50-50 fight, so you can't really say all in all that that was not a good version of Miguel Cotto. When it comes down to it, then I really need to know what names you're talking about.
That being said, I think Canelo is a great talent. I think he's had a great career, and of course, he's a Hall of Famer. There's no doubt about that. But I think there's a little bit more window dressing with his record than people recognize with this career. I think his
I'm sorry, sir, but no, I can't agree with that. And basically, what that's going along the same lines is that basically that's a new media type of narrative. Now, do I think that Andre Ward associates with new media? No, I don't think that he necessarily does. But I'm sure that he is not the only. I'm sure that new media is not the only types that share that same opinion. But I'm sorry, sir. No, I just can't agree with that because then what that also would mean is that you possibly could be talking about Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders, and I couldn't agree with that either. Once again, Andre, if you're making your point on that, I need to know what names you're talking about specifically. Because if you're talking about Gennady Golovkin, no, sir, I'm sorry, I can't agree with that. He was coming off of a victory over Vanes Martirosyan, a fighter that no one had ever stopped previously out of Arasani Lara, Demetrius Bubo Andrade, and even one of the Charlo brothers. And Gennady Golovkin got in the ring and literally whooped that man's ass in less than 2 rounds. So I'm not quite sure if I can agree with you, sir. When you're talking about Danny Jacobs was pretty much going to be the best that he could be. That was a very competitive version of Danny Jacobs. After the Canelo fight, Danny was done. When you talk about Billy Joe Saunders, the best version of Billy Joe Saunders, he fought the best version of Callum Smith. He also fought the best version of Caleb Plant. So no, sir, I'm sorry, I can't agree with that.
team has done a phenomenal job. You got to give it to Oscar De La Hoya a lot of credit. He doesn't get a lot of credit for co-signing Canelo earlier in his career and also helping with the matchmaking. He continues by saying
So basically what Andre SOG Ward is stating here is that, he thinks that Canelo, all in all, that he ended up overall getting matched up perfectly. And I'm sorry, Andre, no, I can't agree with that. And my nose is kind of sniffing some bullshit here. It just is what it is. And I like Andre, but no, I'm not buying what you're selling.
when to, because Canelo to fight certain guys and when to stay away. Benavidez is not going to happen right now. It's not going to happen because it is too dangerous. Andre Ward concluded by saying there's no rush to fight Benavidez. Wow.
So Andre Ward is basically claiming that Mr. Canelo Alvarez is afraid of David Benavidez. And what I will state is this. If Canelo ends up losing to Dimitri Bivol, and if he does not continue to face overall Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez, he is going to get a lot of criticism and deserved criticism. Because after that, there will basically be no excuse anymore not to face off with those fighters. They're in your weight class when it comes down to it, and they're both very decent fights. Now, if he ends up beating Dimitri Bivol and going after Artur Beterbiev or Egilberto Zerda Ramirez, those fights are, decent. So there's really no problem with facing off against those type of fighters. But if he ends up losing to Dimitri Bivol, he is going to have to face David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo. Period. Point blank.
Now, Andre Ward, he's a man of many words and sometimes a man of few words. Like, he usually speaks when he has things to say that are relevant. And this was good conversation, not from Max Kellerman, but from Andre Ward. Andre Ward, very eloquent in his delivery, and he touched on a lot of points for the length of this particular segment. So hats off to SOG. Now, everything he's saying is true. And in fact,
No, not everything that he's saying is true. In fact, to be quite honest with you, most of what he is saying is untrue. I'm sorry, Mr. Andre, and I agree with the majority of what you have to say, sir, but you're dead wrong on this one. You struck out. It just is what it is. Because what names are you specifically talking about? Once again, people are talking about Canelo Alvarez like he's just been cherry picking people at the right time. People used to say the same thing with Floyd Mayweather Jr., and that's why I compare Canelo in certain regards to Floyd Mayweather Jr., and that's how you know he is a real threat to the number one pound for pound position. Now, I would not have him there at the current moment because of his most recent loss in his last 50-50 fight against Dimitri Bivol. But the way people talk about him, you know, all in all, what people truly think about Canelo. Because it's the same way that people used to talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Manny Pacquiao or Andre S.O.G. Ward. Not only is there a certain amount of people that adore and love Canelo Alvarez, there's also a certain amount of people trying to tear him down at every single turn.
I've told you all this stuff on my channel. Make sure you guys subscribe. Ego Stradamus strikes again. People can say whatever they want, but it's so funny when I say all of these things on my channel. I'm on the front line. I'm public enemy number one. People don't understand where I'm coming from or pretend that they don't.
Well, no, I understand where you're coming from, Ego. I just think that you're full of shit. It just is what it is. It's not very hard for me to understand your perspective. I just think that you're wrong. It is what it is, and you are wrong. Because it's no offense, but I mean, I'm sorry, but these were the same guys that were claiming that Gennady Golovkin, that his career was a complete disappointment. Well, his career can't be a complete disappointment if all in all, apparently, because apparently the reason why that is because he lost the biggest fight in his career. Well, apparently he was old. When you guys overall not when you don't want to give credit to Canelo Alvarez, but then all in all, when you don't want to give credit to Triple G, you just state all in all that he was always overrated and he wasn't able to win the biggest fight of his career. So which is it? So I'm sorry, but no. I'm not buying the shit that Andre Ward is selling, and I like Andre SOG Ward. 10 times, 9 times out of 10, he's a logical commentator, and I usually have to agree with what he says. But no, I'm sorry, I can't agree with this one.
They truly understand when I'm saying it in real time. If you know the names, faces, and the players in this game, and for whatever reason, it's met with all types of resistance, but resistance is futile. And at the end of the day, what's done in the dark comes to light. And now we're starting to see. To be honest, I think Canelo versus Triple G3 was a fight that exposed both of Canelo, and it also exposed Triple G, and it exposed the zone.
Well, how can it expose Triple G all in all, at least in terms of talking about his fighting style, if you think that he was nowhere near the same fighter? But of course, he could just mean overall about certain fights that he was going to take.
Basically, it was a walking L, which is what I predicted. This was a fight that I don't really know anyone that watched it and thoroughly enjoyed it. And
Well, no, of course not. This was not going to be a fight that once again lived up to the other trilogy, or excuse me, lived up overall to the other two matches. And if you expected that, then you didn't really overall know both of these fighters coming into it and what point in time they were in their career. But anyway.
You have to be honest with yourself, hand over heart. It was the worst of the trilogy, which I also predicted.
Yes, as I also predicted, it wasn't really that hard to predict, Mr. Ego Stradamus. I mean, once again, anyone can really say that. I told you that. I mean, it just, if you had a boxing mind, you knew that this was going to be the worst of the trilogies. If you pay attention to boxing and if you paid attention to where Gennady Golovkin was at this point in time in his career, you knew that this more than likely, if Canelo was still at a good point in his career, that this was not going to be that competitive of a fight.
No way you could tell me Canelo Golovkin 1 or Canelo Golovkin 2 was worse a fight. I'm not talking about outcomes because the first two, there was some controversy with the outcomes. I'm just talking about from start to finish, bell to bell, what fight was more enthralling? What fight was more scintillating? What fight did you get up out of your seat for or had high drama? The third fight was just, the reason why I'm saying it exposed both of them. Canelo was coming directly off a loss to Dimitri Bivol. If he's who they say he is, and number one pound for pound, which he was just on the pound for pound list, and things.
Well, right now, Canelo Alvarez cannot be number one pound for pound. And I like Canelo, but you cannot be number one pound for pound unless you avenge that loss to Dimitri Bivol. Because going into that fight, you were looked at as a 50-50 guy, or you were looked at as the favorite. So right now, no, Canelo Alvarez is not number one pound for pound, but he is an all-time great fighter. I don't think that there's really any. I don't think there's really any denying that. Now, once again, can say that? Can you say maybe with Canelo that there's a couple of names that he fought that maybe were not at the 100% prime of his career? If you wanted to, maybe if you wanted to state with, Sergey Kovalev, that would be a very fair statement. Miguel Cotto, maybe, but Miguel Cotto was still an A grade fighter when Canelo fought him. And it was very clear that Miguel Cotto was still very competitive. He could just not handle Canelo Alvarez's boxing skills and also probably his somewhat size advantage. So, it just is what it is. But who else are you really talking about? Because Andre Ward stated that, well, you have to give a lot of credit to Oscar De La Hoya. So that means you're talking about even the time to where Canelo Alvarez was with Oscar. I need to know exactly who you're talking about.
Like that, despite failing a drug test before, right? Then you would think that he would have went after the fresh meat, pause, and tried to avenge the Bivol fight, especially considering the.
Well, no, not necessarily, because I think Canelo Alvarez is intelligent enough to know that he needed to rebuild himself after that fight. Something that Deontay Wilder should have done very similarly, because in my opinion, it was not the smartest of ideas to head into the Tyson Fury trilogy. A lot of people once again criticized Canelo Alvarez's decision not to head into not to head into the Dimitri Bivol rematch. I thought that it was the perfect decision, and the reason why that is because sometimes after a loss, you need to rebuild yourself and rebuild your confidence. You don't just head in there against the same meat grinder that all in all ended up just kicking your ass the prior fight. You have to rebuild yourself. You have to rebuild your confidence.
The fact that Canelo Alvarez says that he beat Bivol and Bivol only won.
Now, of course, if you're talking about a draw or if you're talking about maybe a split decision, that's a little bit different. But this was not either. He clearly lost the fight, and he lost the fight dominantly, so I didn't really have a problem with it. The people that wanted to see the Dimitri Bivol rematch were either A, Canelo Alvarez fans that were really hoping and praying that Canelo was going to get the immediate victory, or B, there were channels like Ego or people like Ego that just want to see the end of Canelo Alvarez.
5 rounds. There's no way you could convince me that Canelo and his team and Eddie Hearn truly believe that he beat Bivol, because if you really think you beat a person, then why wouldn't you do an immediate run back and rematch?
I would agree with that. And what that tells you and what that tells me is that Canelo was intelligent enough to know that if I'm going to beat this guy, then I'm overall going to have to put on a hell of a performance, and I'm going to overall have to pump the brakes and reflect and refresh and learn on why I lost that fight. And Canelo Alvarez knows that that is a very, very big fight. In my view, that is the reason why he's not fighting Benavidez or Jamal Charlo right now. Now, I could be wrong about that, but the main reason why Canelo, in my view, hasn't fought those two yet is because he is looking to see what his peak potential is going to be. And if he beats Dimitri Bivol, more than likely he's going to end up facing Artur Beterbiev. But we'll see what happens.
What would be the point of just simple common sense? Why would Rematch Room and Eddie Hearn and Canelo's side put a one-way rematch clause in the contract that stipulated only if Canelo loses does he have the opportunity to rematch Dimitri Bivol? And in this particular case, he lost.
Same fucking reason overall why Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao had rematch clauses. Because that's your main investment. And all in all, you want them to get the opportunity to possibly win that back. It's really not that hard to understand.
Bivol, and he didn't trigger the rematch. So why would you even take the time? What's the point of even putting a rematch clause in the contract if you're not going to exercise it? Reason being,
because I think that Canelo Alvarez knows, all in all, that if he did an immediate rematch with Mr. Dimitri Bivol, then more than likely he would not be the victor in that fight. And once again, Canelo knew that he was going to have to come back and say, am I really as good as what I think I am? And I think that that this was a confidence booster. And Canelo, I think, thinks that he can beat Dimitri Bivol, but he knows that it's going to be one hell of a time. He knows that if he is going to defeat Dimitri Bivol, he's going to have to be absolutely spotless in that fight. He's going to have to put on the best performance that he has ever put on in his career. His stamina is going to have to be up to par. He's going to have a multitude of game plans or the perfect game plan in that fight. And all in all, he's going to have to show a little bit of confidence. He's going to overall have to show Dimitri Bivol that he is going to have what it takes to really overall go toe to toe with him, I guess, in the sort of speaking, or really overall go to war with him. That he'll do anything, whatever it takes, to win that fight. That he's not going to back down.
You just want that as a cushion and as a safety net in the event that you lose. Then you can make the decision and you can force the person's hand. But seeing how badly Bivol beat him, I don't think Canelo wanted to run that back immediately. So he tried to pick on a 40-year-old Golovkin. And as you guys heard,
well, he tried to pick a fighter that not only would it bring its advantages in terms of money when it came down to it, and not only all in all is it a way to end off the trilogy, and I think that there might have been a way also to, give Golovkin some benefits here because it would give him an opportunity against Canelo, which is clearly the only fighter that he wanted to fight for the past couple of years when it came down to it. And on top of that, it would be a way to end the trilogy, maybe make some money. And DAZN has been wanting that fight for a long time. So I think that Canelo, he took a look at it and said, I'm going to fight this fight. All in all, this is going to be, a little bit of a tune-up fight, a warm-up fight. And I'm going to see if I'm in the right place to rematch someone like a Dimitri Bivol because he's better than what I once originally thought.
From SOG, you guys, I don't know if you wanted to listen to me when I said it, but Andre Ward is saying the same thing. Golovkin, for the last several years, has looked older. He's looked different.
Well, was it for the last several years or only for the past few years? There's a difference between a few years and several years. Golovkin has looked not the same fighter for the past few years. I want to say the last several years.
And he looks shot worn. I mean, I'm talking about Steve Rolls fights. Basically every fight on DAZN. Basically every fight since the Canelo loss on HBO. Every DAZN fight. Steve Rolls, he was getting tagged. No one even knew who that was. This was a guy who never really fought outside of Canada. Never had like a bunch of 10 and 12 round fights. And he was even tagging Triple G, some obscure unknown guy. It took several rounds for Triple G to get Kamil Sesmeta out of there. When Triple G fought Deryevchenko, I thought he should have lost the fight, and he got hurt. It looked like he was about to get stopped.
I agree. And I said this for the past couple of years. Gennady has not been the same fighter ever since that Canelo Alvarez rematch.
Deryevchenko in one of the rounds. So Canelo knew what he was doing. He was trying to cherry pick.
Well, it's not really a cherry pick. What a cherry pick is that all in all, you take a fight that isn't really going to earn anything in terms of potential, whether it be money or whether it's just a fight that really nobody wants to see, like Gervonta Tank Davis against Isaac Pitbull Cruz. That's what a cherry pick is, or Gervonta Tank Davis against Rolly Romero. That's somewhat what a cherry pick is. But I'm not even sure if I'll call that a cherry pick, at least 100%, because some people did actually want to see that fight for whatever reason. Anyways, this is going to be the second part of the video because it ended up cutting out. But anyways, as I was continuing overall from what Mr. Boxing Ego was stating, he was claiming all in all that the fight between Canelo and Gennady Golovkin was that of a cherry pick. And I stated this, a cherry pick in my view is a fight that has no intended value whatsoever, to where it is a fight that almost nobody wants to see. I wouldn't call this fight a cherry pick. I would say that maybe all in all, if it was going to be between, let's say Canelo had won, after Dimitri Bivol, and even had he won the fight, I'm not sure if I would call the Gennady Golovkin fight a cherry pick anyway, because it's a fight that DAZN and a lot of people did want to see, even though it's not a fight that I personally was super duper interested in. But cherry picks are fights like Gervonta Tank Davis versus Isaac Pitbull Cruz, or or certain other fights that, maybe I'm not thinking about right now. Maybe all in all, like, what's another good example? Like Jamal Charlo when he fought Juan Macias Montiel, when he could potentially be facing other fighters of that division, but he's just waiting on Canelo. That's what a cherry pick is, anyway. Or Mikey Garcia versus some of his other opponents.
And that's why he also fought Kovalev, because he waited for Andre Ward and Eliter Alvarez to beat and stop Kovalev. And then he had a super tough fight with Anthony Yard. Canelo calls him on a quick turnaround scenario. And then that's when Canelo decides and opts to fight him. So,
well, listen, Mr. Ego, I understand what you're saying. And if you're going to bring on Mr. Sergey Kovalev as one of the fighters that maybe is a little bit padding for his record, I would certainly understand that. But Sergey Kovalev, at the point in time, no, he wasn't the same top 5 pound-for-pound fighter anymore as what he once was when Andre SOG Ward was. That's completely fair to state. But to state on the note that that fight has no value, I'm not quite sure if I can agree with that. Because Sergey Kovalev was coming off of 2 very decent wins. He was coming off of a very dominant victory in the rematch over Eleider Alvarez, the same fighter that stopped him. You would assume that if Sergey Kovalev was washed up, that he was not able to win that fight, or that he shouldn't have been able to win that fight. And then he was able to beat the undefeated British talent Anthony Yarde, to where, yes, there were certain rounds to where he had problems, but that is a narrative that is majorly overrated. There was one round to where Kovalev looked in trouble. Every other round, Kovalev was giving Anthony Yarde a boxing lesson, and he ended up getting the knockout. That's when Canelo Alvarez fought him. It's not like he fought him when Terrence Bud Crawford fought Kell Brook or Amir Khan, and they had absolutely no value at that point in time in their career. And let's keep in mind that that was going to be the first fight in Canelo Alvarez's career to where he was at light heavyweight. So I'll give him a little bit of a break. So, if you want to maybe say that it wasn't his greatest win, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But to state on the note that it's just a win that doesn't have any value, I'm not really sure if I can state that.
I think people are now starting to see it, or it's so flagrant. Now you're seeing more and more people speak on it. But this is what I.
Well, no, really, when it comes down to it, Andre SOG Ward, in my view, he really doesn't have that much of a point, because besides Sergey Kovalev, who are you really talking about? Who else is really patted on his record? You can't really claim Gennady Golovkin was. I mean, you can if you want to, but sure, you can claim that he's 36. But all in all, when it comes down to it, Gennady Golovkin was at the best point in time in his career. When you talk about Danny Jacobs, he was at the best point in time in his career. Lara, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith. Now, some people may say, well, Callum Smith wasn't coming off of that great of a performance. Right, but there's certain fighters that don't come off of great performances, but you expect them to do better because they may rise to the occasion. Tyson Fury looked like shit, I believe, against Otto Wallin. But then in the next match against Deontay Wilder, he ended up knocking him out, putting on one of the best performances in his career. So that's just how certain fighters are. That's not me trying to make an excuse, but you expect Callum Smith to rise to the occasion. That's just how it is. And these are the same guys that are claiming that they want to see Jamal Charlo. Didn't Jamal Charlo look like absolute shit in his last fight? But I forget, to whatever is convenient, these guys will claim, which fights they want to see, and then immediately say they don't want to see those fights because apparently those fighters don't look the same anymore. But then when Canelo apparently isn't facing Jamal Charlo, then all of a sudden they want to see the fight again. And that's how you can tell that they just, they don't like Canelo. But anyway.
Been speaking on my channel, so it just feels great. It feels beautiful to have my channel. And at the end of the day, you guys got the breadcrumbs. You can hear what I said. It's cemented in history. And like I said, the rest of the boxing world seems to be catching up. I'll give credit.
Well, Andre SOG Ward said what he said. Do I agree with it? No, I don't agree with it whatsoever. An example is someone beating up a fighter that is not really a prime name is a Terrence Bud Crawford beating up that of a Kell Brook or an Amir Khan when he fought them. An example of a fighter not beating up a prime name, all in all, is Gervonta Tank Davis when he beat Yuriorkis Gamboa. That's what that is an example of. Now, if you're talking about someone like Canelo, when he fought Danny Jacobs or Gennady Golovkin or Errol Spence if he faces Danny Garcia or someone, maybe like a Kell Brook or a Sean Porter, yeah, some of those fighters may have losses, but you could still tell that they're still at very competitive points in their careers. Saying Canelo Alvarez has not fought or that most of his wins, great wins in his career are against fighters that were not in their prime, that's like me stating all in all that it's the same case with Errol Spence. That just doesn't make any sense. Sure, you can argue that Danny Garcia and Sean Porter and Kell Brook all had losses, but for the welterweight division, you could still tell that they were still very competitive. So let's be logical and objective here.
Outside of myself, I'll give credit to Juan Manuel Marquez and Nacho Beristain. Between the three of us and David Fatelson of ESPN, Elos Golpes, right? Between us.
Well, there's no offense against Juan Manuel Marquez, but it's very clear that he's had a personal issue with Canelo Alvarez for a very long time. I don't know what is up his ass for Canelo Alvarez, but he's had a very personal issue. So anything that Juan Manuel Marquez says about Canelo, I really don't take too seriously.
Us four, we've been telling you the whole Canelo, you know, what's been going on, and now you're hearing Andre Ward say it as well.
No, you're claiming on the know what you think is going on or what you want to be going on. But once again, if you're a person that looks at things logically and objectively, I really don't know how you can claim that most of Canelo Alvarez's career wins that they're against guys who were quote unquote washed up. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Billy Joe Saunders was still an undefeated fighter. Callum Smith was an undefeated fighter. Caleb Plant was an undefeated fighter. Danny Jacobs was at the best point in his career. He had just won the second title in his career over Sergey Dervyachenko, a guy that apparently a certain amount of these guys will claim, got avoided by Gennady Golovkin for a while and Canelo Alvarez, and some even allege Demetrius Bubble Andrade. So, that just doesn't make any sense. Miguel Cotto was an A-grade fighter when Canelo fought him. Kovalev, even though he was a little bit more wore down, he was an A-grade fighter when Canelo fought him. Could it be maybe because overall he's a little bit more comfortable with saying this because Canelo recently lost his last big fight in his career? We'll see overall what happens, but like I said, Canelo, if he's going to shut up a certain amount of his detractors, like that of an Andre Ward, he is going to have to win that of a Dimitri Bivol rematch. But this does make me wonder if Andre Ward has a personal distaste on or a personal bet with Canelo Alvarez, and what I'm saying here, or a personal attachment. Because to me, it's a little bit odd, Andre Ward all in all stating the statement that he did. But anyway.
He's saying that they know when to fight guys. Benavidez is too dangerous. So Canelo, he can say whatever he wants. I don't want to fight a Mexican fighter and make it look like it's a pride thing. You don't want to fight David Benavidez for the same reason that Floyd said, and Andre Ward is now saying, because it's a dangerous opposition and it's a bigger guy, younger guy, and you don't want to have to go through that, right? Just like you didn't want to do an immediate Bivol rematch. So it'll be interesting to see how long DAZN can even stay in business, at least in America, with Canelo robbing the bank and not getting events that people are getting up for, which would make that ROI and make everything make sense. They had paid Canelo, the report said Canelo Golovkin 3, the main event, got $75 million between two people. And if you think about that, that's a huge waste and a huge loss, considering the event, the undercard wasn't good, and the whole event seemed like it was unsatisfactory. People didn't seem like they were thrilled with the outcome. You didn't see it trending and going viral on Twitter, and there was no knockdowns, no knockouts, no real good moments. And like Andre Ward said, and like I said, it looked like Triple G had been regressing for several years, and it looked like he showed up for a paycheck. Boom, we unpacked. Introducing.
Anyways, that's really about it for this video. But I think all in all, that is going to be very interesting to see where Mr. Canelo Alvarez's career takes from here. Is going to be very particularly interesting because, excuse me, and I've seen this with all the all-time greats, not even just fighters, but certain particular athletes. Of course, when you're winning, it's very hard all in all to talk about them in even a critical respect because so many people will think that you're crazy talking about them from a critical respect because they seem on top of the world. But then when they start to do bad, then people all in all, you'll see more detractors come out because they feel more comfortable. Could it be because Andre Ward seen that Canelo all in all, that he lost his last big 50-50 fight against that of a Dimitri Bivol, now that he's coming out and stating what he's personally always thought about Canelo, where all in all that he's somewhat, stating his distaste for Canelo? It could be. It could be. But either A, Andre Ward believes that Canelo Alvarez is overrated as a fighter, or B, he has a personal distaste for him. It might be a little bit of both, because I have a hard time believing that Andre Ward has no personal distaste for Canelo whatsoever, and every single time I hear you talk about him, there's nothing positive that comes out of your mouth. It just is what it is. Anyways, but that's really about it for today. But this is going to be very interesting for Canelo. This is going to be very, very interesting to see what happens at this point in time in his career. Because if he does rematch Dimitri Bivol, which is what I'm predicting next, that is not a guaranteed victory. That is not a guaranteed victory at all. In fact, if I were to come out with a fight prediction right now, I may even favor Dimitri Bivol just ever so slightly because of the confidence all in all that he may have over that first fight. But we'll see all in all what ends up happening. And if he does end up losing against Dimitri Bivol, he is going to have to fight Jamal Charlo, and he is going to have to fight David Benavidez, and he's going to have to beat them if he wants to stay on my top 30 all-time list. At least overall, somewhere there. But anyways, it's going to be very interesting. We'll see all in all what ends up happening. But anyways, going to be very interesting to see next year what happens for Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. Hopefully, all in all, he faces the winner of the Dimitri Bivol versus Gilberto Zerto Ramirez match. And if that does not happen, I would personally like to see Jamal Charlo. But it will be very interesting anyway. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.